Happy Halloween, you fucking animals. So, I know I said sci-fi movies were coming next, but, well, 'tis the season for some horror. Now, I'm a big fan of horror movies. Try to keep that on the DL, but it's one of my many secrets. And, in the new Death of Hollywood, there's a lot to talk about. So in March of this year, there was an IndieWire article posted asking critics about the term elevated horror, and if that's something that should be applied to horror of this new era. Most of the critics interviewed said, no, that's fucking dumb. This article also received a ton of attention, mostly by people saying, no, that's fucking dumb. So the general consensus is, that shit is fucking dumb. And I completely agree. Elevated horror as a term sort of assumes that horror as like a baseline is shit and just about spooky jokes jumping out. And anything that isn't is something different. When that's not fucking true at all. Horror, like any other genre, has good and bad. Horror films since the early days have shown off some of the top tier filmmaking craft and have also been able to be incredibly profound and thought-provoking.
Go! You live! You stay. We belong dead.
Like, you might as well just call a Tarantino or Fincher movie elevated Hollywood for all the good that shit does. But why don't people see him like that? Well, two reasons. First, the Academy doesn't give a shit, but fuck 'em. Second is, for a while there, horror was kinda bad. For about 2 decades, horror was a straight-to-VHS dumping ground or a quick studio cash grab. It's weird, it felt like The Exorcist came out and people stopped trying? That isn't true, of course. What it really was the slasher movie. They became moneymakers, and then sequels to slasher movies became moneymakers, and then they just kept coming. Not even in the theater anymore, but with the advent of VHS, they could just keep making them. No one really took horror seriously anymore. They became this weird, archaic niche genre that was about looking to the past to find the good stuff. But recently, they sort of came back into vogue and back into good. So, what we're gonna do for this video is sort of do a timeline of horror's resurrection. And I'm gonna give little bits of everything, but I'm gonna really try and focus on one movie per year. Also, I'm gonna be focusing more on independent film. You know, auteur-driven horror. So, I think it all started around in 2012 with 2 little movies. Well, mostly one, and that one was called VHS. So, VHS was an indie project made by several filmmakers from Bloody Disgusting, the website. And it was a found footage movie made in the time that the Paranormal Activity movies and knockoffs were making people start to fucking hate found footage movies. Then, this little anthology movie comes along and just uses everything it's got to make itself scary. It didn't employ as many jump scares as were normal in this era, and similar to Drive, it got people talking about it. There was a bit of a clamoring for good horror since, you know, it was few and far between, and truth is, this one, I feel, was sort of its inceptor. It was huge in starting it, and I'm not giving it as much credit as it's maybe due, but that's because it's not the one I really want to talk about from 2012. The one I do want to talk about is... Beyond the Black Rainbow is a movie I think I might have said came out in 2010 and before Drive. Don't know why I thought that, but I was completely wrong. This movie was the work of Panos Cosmatos, the dude who did Mandy, and was a movie that sort of started a visual trend for sci-fi movies. It was a callback movie to the sort of neon-soaked movies of the 70s and 80s. But, instead of just using, like, neon lights on set, it also used digital color grading to sort of enhance the ones that were on set, to add that much more color. Give it that really, really futuristic look that we know so well today. You know, those stark yellows in Ad Astras and the neon hues of Blade Runner? Beyond the Black Rainbow. Those deep reds and black contrasts in The Last Jedi? Beyond the Black Rainbow. The fucking plot of Ex Machina and literally everything about the movie The Void? Bitch, guess who? The look and feel of our decade's science fiction, pioneered by dudes like Villeneuve and Garland, seem to owe a lot to our boy Panos, And they ain't the only ones. The tone and pace of this movie are also a big part of it. This movie, like the first half of Mandy, is slow and ponderous, and it just bathes you in its metaphysical drug trip world. It's another movie that uses the language of film to tell its story. In a different movie like this, they would have just explained the scientific processes of opening your third eye, and this movie doesn't explain shit, it just shows you what's happening. And this bled into other horror movies. VHS set the method, this movie set the tone. Now, I feel like this movie doesn't get enough credit, but it seems to me that it's a fucking cornerstone of modern film. Watching it, it's hard to believe that it's a real fucking movie that just looks like that the whole time. You know, it's funny to me how, like, Snyder stans defend the DC movies with Kubrick and Carpenter were panned by critics in their time, too. Nah, fam, that ain't it. Panos Cosmatos, though, that's the man who was ahead of his fucking time. Bet you feel like an idiot now, huh, Rene Rodriguez of the Miami Herald? Fuck you! I have nothing against this man. I'm sure he's a pretty cool dude, and I bet the rest of his reviews are great.
After 2012 came 2013, surprising a lot of people who put a lot of stock into the Mayan calendar. 2013 saw The Conjuring, which was the start of the Conjuring cinematic universe. It was also kind of a great year for Blumhouse too, with the first Purge movie coming out, starting that whole fucking thing, Insidious 2 as well. They also had a Rob Zombie film. They were making a name for themselves. VHS 2 also came out this year, and the Evil Dead remake. It was pretty good. Anyway, moving on. Then we move into 2014. While 2012 sort of set the stage, I think this is where the first lines of the play were said. Specifically, by one particular movie. When I heard that there was an Australian horror movie that was really good and making everything else look like fucking garbage, I assumed that really good meant really good for a horror movie. You know, better than most horror movies out there, but nothing I'd put on a top 10 of the year list, you know what I'm saying? That's how I sort of felt about VHS. Swims in the genre, sinks in the medium at large. Jennifer Kent's The Babadook, however, is just a really, really good movie.
If you took horror and LGBTQ icon The Babadook out of The Babadook, it would still be a compelling story. Really, the spooky ghost is only a small part of the movie. Jennifer Kent, the director, said it was a movie about the need to face the darkness in ourselves and in our lives. It's essentially a movie about that lady who made that one Twitter post about childless mothers at Disney World. The Babadook, in this example, is the millennial couples who she and the kid are lashing out at, but there's a lot more worrying shit underneath. The Babadook really is just sort of a metaphor in a movie about a woman trying to raise her autistic kid, trying to be a good mom, failing, trying not to attack her kid in the same way everyone else is, failing, and still not having processed the death of her husband. She's also dealing with insomnia, her sexual repression, her shitty job, her sister who's the nastiest and basicest bitch in the world.
That's a real tragedy.
Hell yeah!
Not having time to go to the gym anymore. How do you cope?
Fucking tell him!
You must have so much to talk about with those poor disadvantaged women.
Yeah, get those high school prep looking at. All of this bullshit boiling up to the point that she breaks. And there's your Babadook. The Babadook sort of reminded people that horror movies can be about other things. Like, they can be more than just a spooky ghost shows up. It can speak to things like anxiety, PTSD, not liking the person you've become, etc. And that's what the movie is about more than just a haunted ghost book. That's not to say that the Babadook himself isn't also a lot of fun, but if all the spooky shit he did was surrounded by a different movie, it would be a little generic, and he wouldn't be getting the love that he's getting. And he is getting a lot of love. He was the first big horror icon to be created in more than a fucking decade.
Also, yeah, it became an LGBTQ icon because it accidentally ended up in Netflix's gay movie section. And the movie doesn't have all that much to do with LGBTQ issues, but fuck it, it's fun. Jennifer Kent, the director, said about it, and I quote, "Ah, you bastard! He doesn't want to die, so he's finding ways to become relevant." Seriously, this is the funniest shit. You can get a Pride Flag version of the DVD, and even the fucking original image is funny as hell. Look at our man out here like, this is a gay movie and I'm gay. I'll live for this shit. This year also had Under the Skin. Under the Skin is another movie that uses the language of film to tell its story. This one, entirely. I'm pretty sure if you took every line of dialogue out of this movie, it wouldn't make all that much of a difference, and I think it really helps with the horror aspect of this particular movie. The lack of dialogue almost forces you into the character's head. It allows you quiet to ponder on how the character is feeling. Their pain, their fear, their fucking lust. I like to refer to these movies wrongly as introspective. This movie, unlike The Tree of Life, doesn't make you look at yourself, but it does give you a very deep and almost visceral understanding of the characters. Like, there's this baby just left on the beach, screaming as Scarlett Johansson drags its parents away. You know its parents are never gonna come back. You watch them die. You know it's going to die. Freezing and starving. You know all of this just looking at it and watching it cry. It's a little fucked up.
This comes back equally strong when you see what happens to the people Scarlett Johansson takes. It's just quiet. Two dudes who have no idea what the fuck is going on and are terrified, floating in a pool. Then one of them runs into a wall, and then just everything is ripped out of him from his back, leaving just a little bit of floating skin. It lets you get into the head of the guy who just had his everything removed. If it wasn't as ponderous, it might not have been as fucked up as it was. Like, if both of these guys were screaming and there was fucking blood everywhere and you got to this guy's rib cage get ripped out, it wouldn't elicit the same feelings. It'd be more gory, sure, but not as scary. That shit wouldn't be nearly as frightening as that almost instant removal. And as a sister movie to Beyond the Black Rainbow, visually this movie also paved the way for that look in sci-fi. Like, Stranger Things was taking direct inspiration from it, from that, like, black room scene. And like with Beyond the Black Rainbow, a lot of what gets taken away is the color palette. There's a lot of blacks on white and blacks on blues that you'll see end up in other movies.
Then along came 2015, and this year had Maggie, Krampus, Final Girls, Crimson Peak, Bone Tomahawk, and those were all really good. But it also had like The Visit, Insidious 3, Sinister 2, #horror. But the one that stood out the most was Robert Eggers' The Witch.
Me and the boys at 2 a.m. trying to live deliciously. This is a movie directed by now beloved horror director Robert Eggers, who became a beloved horror director because of his film The Witch. The Witch is about a family, their bond, togetherness, and a sense of community being fucking destroyed by Satan, or at least their perception of him. This theme starts with the setup of the movie. This family gets kicked out of their community and forced to live on their own. This goes bad when good old-fashioned Satanism tries to rend them apart and does a damn good job. It's a wonderful tension builder because the fear isn't from without, it's from within. Each of the characters is holding a knife to the other's throat, accusing them of being the witch. It's like The Thing for Mennonites. Most of this particular satanic panic is pointed at Thomason, our main character and the girl who's probably the purest and therefore the one Satan wants the most. Well, except for maybe the dad. He's trying his best, the poor guy. One of the real nice things about this movie is how period accurate it is. Like, in every sense. The witch stuff is super accurate to what people thought witches were around that time. Haxan is a real nice compliment to this movie. The dialogue is just about as on point as it can be. This movie is also kind of a slow burn in comparison to its contemporaries throughout the rest of the year. This movie is a lot different. There's not that many scary ghosts. There's no big horror moments. The most intense scene in this movie is a kid speaking in tongues and two little kids forgetting the Lord's Prayer. Fucking incredible child actors carrying these movies, by the way, like the Babadook in this shit. And that also brings me to how really good performances can fucking carry a horror movie. And that's kind of something that moves with all these horror movies. They all allow the movies to stay small. They don't need to resort to anything big. The tone and the acting is enough to scare you. The Witch is one of the best examples of this new wave of horror because it sits the genre down and says, look, you don't need to make the ghost open its mouth real wide to make something scary. It can just be a family that kills each other.
This movie came out around the time that people were starting to take note of A24's rise to power. A24 has been kind of instrumental in this decade as a haven for independent film. They're a recognizable studio that produces a certain kind of movie, and they've kind of been blowing it out of the water, and I hope more studios follow in their footsteps without going bankrupt. Anyway, 2015 had a bunch of good movies, and it was pretty great that they showed up. But then, holy shit, 2016. We got fucking Hush, we got fucking Don't Breathe, Lights Out, 10 Cloverfield Lane, Train to Busan. Holy shit! It was at this point clear that horror wasn't getting the few good apples every once in a while, but that it was getting a full-on redemption arc. Like, damn 2016, calm the fuck down. But my favorite of this particular year is Hong Jin-na's The Wailing.
This movie is a ride, like it's got everything in it. Zombies, possessions, witch doctors, ghosts, Satan. You want a fucking Halloween movie that covers all the bases? This is it. So the best and most efficient way to describe this movie is that if Frankenstein was told from the perspective of the angry mob, or a angry mobster. It makes this angry mobster a very sympathetic character, who's a little bit of an idiot and a little bit of a fuck-up, but is genuinely concerned for the safety of his family. It's his one and only concern, and when his daughter gets possessed by a sickness that's been going through the town, he tries everything he can to save her. That's the basic premise. And like The Witch and the Babadook, it's about more than that. Specifically, letting the fear and xenophobia get to you. Our main character blames a Japanese man for all of the horrible things happening to his town and his daughter, when he shouldn't, maybe. This movie has, like, several twists, and unfortunately, this keeps me from talking about the intricacies of the plot like I want to, but it throws you in a bunch of directions. It is a ride in the best possible way. Like, damn, Korean filmmakers have been going hard the last 10 years, haven't they? And the twists in this movie are almost like fairy tale punishments. Like, this guy didn't fucking listen and did a dumb thing and now he's being punished for him. Like, should have followed the direct instructions you were given, asshole. And it leads to a really good sort of dichotomy of the main character. He's a fucking idiot and constantly does either stupid or just bad things, but he's also being constantly talked down to. He's terrified and he's desperate. Jong-gu is an incredibly flawed human being, and that makes him an interesting character. Hate him for the things he's doing, love him for the reasons he's doing them. Fucking great. Real fucking great.
2016 set a standard, and 2017 led it up. Horror isn't allowed to be shit anymore. Can't get away with that, no siree. And so it wasn't. 1922 and Geralds Game came out this year, Netflix got those, and The Ritual. This was a movie that had one of the best designs for a monster in fucking forever, but well, aside from that, it was mostly just okay. But here's where the shit started getting into the populace. Jordan Peele, you know, the guy from Key and Peele, released a movie this year. You probably know about it. It was called Get Out.
Now, I don't want to talk about this one too much. Partially because I was a white dude and don't really have the proper context and don't feel comfortable speaking as an authority on black issues, but also because everyone else has already said everything there is to say about this movie, and I don't have all that much to add, and that's kinda great. This movie, as I'm sure you know, is about racism, but not like Green Book, you don't belong around here racism. It's a much more close to home, I'm not racist but kind of racism. It's a very modern sort that could be confrontational. It might make some people look at themselves after watching this movie and think, shit, maybe that's me. And also, along with that, it resonates with a lot of people who have experienced it. And that's one of the things that makes this a great horror movie. It takes that particular brand of racism to a believable extreme. Really what I feel like encapsulates this era of horror is making the horror about something other than the monster. In Babadook, Jennifer Kent adds the monster as a metaphor. Jordan Peele, however, just takes the other thing and makes that the monster. It's such a clever, creative way to deliver a message, and it's really effective. Seriously, conceptually, Jordan Peele's movies are always really creative. It puts the message right front center screen, doesn't sugarcoat it or make it more digestible for audiences. He just adds another layer to it. Like, this movie could have just been a character study about a guy who goes to his girlfriend's parents' house and has to deal with their bullshit, and it would probably be really good, but he takes it a step further than that. The man is a damn good storyteller.
Now we move on to 2018, last year. Also a very good year. The Clove Hitch Killer was pretty damn good. We also had A Quiet Place, directed by Jim from The Office. But let's be real, the really big horror movie that came out this year was Hereditary.
Hereditary was a movie produced by A24 that was incredibly well received. It was directed by Ari Aster, who previously directed Tito's Dick Fart. It's a movie about a group of women who worship evil, and was actually a movie that gave the Oscars a lot of flack for not even mentioning Tilda Swinton, Toni Collette, for her powerhouse performance.
Fuck it.
Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria is one of like 4 soft reboots that not only expands on their source material, but also survives on their own merits. Not in the same way that like Fury Road or 2049 expanded on theirs, but in the way that Guadagnino's Suspiria is so very different than Argento's Suspiria, it basically buys its necessity. Last year I made a video on Argento's films, and I was excited to see this one, expecting something different. Now this movie wasn't just different, it was flipped on its head. Like the rest of these movies, it's not about the witches being monsters, it's about them being misled. This movie does not present witchcraft as evil. If anything, in some contexts, it presents witchcraft as a representation of feminine strength and solidarity, and how the concept of that can be corrupted by following the wrong leader. It's a very political movie, not only with the internal witch politics, but also with the external politics of Germany in the 1970s, especially with Tilda Swinton's second character trying to find the truth out about his wife. It's also very much about dance, and by extension art, which flows into sexuality. This movie isn't about one thing, this movie is about a bunch of things. And yeah, it's a horror movie, and when the horror happens, it happens really hard, but similar to how Panos didn't get as much love as he deserved from critics, I'm pretty sure this one is going to be remembered by history better than a lot of the critics saw it, for one particular reason. They tried to read it the same way you'd read Argento's film. The nays cite its lack of scares, and I mean, it does have those, but I guess not in as much abundance. The movie isn't about those in the same way Argento's is. And unlike the Babadook and Get Out, where the horror is part of the theme, in this movie the horror is sort of an aside. Dario Argento himself's criticism was, it didn't thrill me. And the movie was trying to do other things as well. But that is, as a whole. I disagree with the foundations of their argument, but also with the content of their argument. The horror moments that do happen in this movie are fucking incredible. It is unrelenting, it is fucked up, and it really does rhyme with Argento in interesting ways. So, I'm gonna have to go into some spoilers here. One of the ways that it rhymes with Argento is the camera is always moving. That was something he did, you know, he always had the camera on a swivel to keep the tension rolling. And there's the black gloves. Now, the black gloves in giallo films are usually worn by the murderer to represent that this is the murderer, and Susie is the one who puts on the black gloves. Now, at first, I thought this was going to be a commentary on how the movie was flipped on its head and the innocent girl puts on the black gloves rather than the murderous Helena Marcos, avatar of Mater Suspiriorum, the Mother of Whispers, and Tilda Swinton's third character. Well...
Who are you? For whom were you anointed? Which of the 3 mothers?
Mother Suspiriorum.
I am she.
I mean, I was sort of right. Again, this movie doesn't frame Mother Suspiriorum as an evil entity, more that the coven following a false idol did terrible things in the false idol's name, and Suspiriorum, the real one, gets revenge on them for it. She's very kind to the innocents who are falsely harmed by it, especially to Dr. Klemper. This is a damn fine movie that's kind of been unjustly overlooked. It's really something else, and I think everyone should give it a watch. It's really fantastic.
Now, as far as this year, 2019 goes, I still haven't seen all it has to offer, so I can't really make that much of a comment on it. Like, I'd at least like to see The Lighthouse first. The return of Robert Eggers, the man who made The Witch. Also, we got the return of Jordan Peele too, with Us. And the return of Ari Aster, director of Hereditary, with Midsommar.
And also The Nightingale, from Jennifer Kent, the director of The Babadook. And I just finished watching that like 10 minutes ago. Jesus Christ, that woman does not fuck around.
And all the ones I've seen have been very fucking good. So instead, I want to talk about my favorite horror movie from this new era. And the thing I just said is a little misleading, for 2 reasons. The first is I couldn't choose between 2 of them. They both got the top spot for me. And the second way it's misleading, neither of these are technically movies.
Forgiveness is warm.
like a tear on a cheek. Think of that and of me. When we stand in the rain, I loved you completely. And you loved me the same. The rest is confetti.
Now, as far as straight-up horror that, like its peers, is actually about something else, The Haunting of Hill House is easily my favorite. On first glance, it looks like and was even based on a basic haunted house story, but it ends up being something else entirely. It explores what happens after the haunted house. It follows each of these characters dealing or not dealing with it in their own ways. It's about how shared trauma and family deaths can pull people together and push them apart. The family of previous huntees are all given their own hour of backstory, so when they go back to the haunted house to confront it, we know them inside and out. And as we gave a better understanding of them as people, we also get a better understanding of the ghosts that haunted them. And, like with our seemingly crazy characters, we learn that they're just a collection of sad, sad stories. And you aren't afraid of the ghosts anymore. You just feel bad for them. You'll go into this expecting a spooky fucking time and leave it sobbing. This show feels like a accumulation of all of that horror before it. All these movies about family strife, mental illness, and horror as a metaphor for something else, this is the apex of it. At one point I sort of described it as Hereditary but better, and I feel like I'm giving a lot of unnecessary shade to Hereditary. Hereditary is a fucking fantastic movie, and it has all these people who love it super hard, and they're fucking valid in that. It's good as hell, really. I don't have a bad thing to say about it, but goddamn, Hill House gets into the exact same place and deep. On an episode-by-episode basis, it peaks at episode 6. Not to say that any of them are bad, but episode 6 is the best one. It's where all of the adult characters finally share a room together. And it's just an hour of 3 long, one-shot takes of them fighting, bonding, sewing together, breaking apart, with just the saddest ending to any episode of a TV show I ever seen. But I like to look at the show as a whole. It's 10 episodes, it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end, and on the whole, it's incredible. Like, even if you're not a big horror fan, this is a show I would more than recommend. But, like everything else, when the horror does show up, it's real good horror. One of the things that sort of brought me back after watching the first episode and not being impressed was how the show would just hide ghosts in the backgrounds of shots. Like, extras would just stand there, almost out of sight in the darkness, like spooky little Easter eggs. It also has both my favorite ghost design ever and the best jump scare in anything I have ever seen. Haunting of Hill House is so good. It is so good that it is getting a second season, and I do not give a shit. The second season can be great or fucking awful, and I won't care at all, because the first season was just so good that it can stand on its own without anything. It's so good that I think that the next thing I bring up should be honored to hold a place with Hill House. As honored as Hill House is to hold a place with it. Over the Garden Wall and Hill House are very different entities. While Hill House has a wonderful Oscar moment for a character where they explain how terrified they are that death is a blank, empty nothingness, Over the Garden Wall has a teacher sing a whole-ass ABC song about that no-good two-timing Jimmy Brown that left her. Over the Garden Wall is the perfect encapsulation of autumn. It's a wonderful jaunt through the unknown, a strange land like a late 1800s storybook, filled with creatures and characters of all sorts, just trying to get along, but with a constant fear of the beast, a creature that stalks the woods, turning the lost and hopeless into trees and making oil from them. Each episode is a little encapsulated destination with its own story that forwards the overarching one. Wirt, Greg, and Beatrice are lost in the woods, and they want to get home. And as they go, you learn more about their predicaments, who they are as people, how they might be able to get back, and more about the world at large. It's so stylish too. The art looks like it came from a storybook your grandma had in a closet, mixed with an old film print. From the corners of the frame being a little blurry to the fucking crazy fisheye lens thing that was probably a pain in the ass to figure out how to animate, speaks to this wonderful visual style that informs on the whole thing. The music, as well, sounds properly old-timey. Being that it's a musical, it's good that it does, and even the way that the dialogue flows in everyone except for the main characters. And, like everything else on the list, when it gets spooky, it gets spooky. But, unlike just about everything else, the monster, the beast, is less of an entity or a metaphor, and more of a villain. He's an active trickster and participant. He's cunning and charismatic. He knows what's best for you, and he can help you, so long as you pay careful attention
to what he has to say.
It is a wonderfully comfy show. It's something you can put on for the whole family, with the only lights being the glow of the fireplace and the TV. I don't know what else there is to say about it. It's just kind of great. And it's like an hour and 40 minutes. Just do yourself a favor and watch it. I have every year that it's been out.
It's pretty definitive that horror is back. And while the term elevated horror is dumb as shit, it does speak to this era. The death of Hollywood is a rejection of what set the norm, and it's trying to move forward by looking back. Which, yeah, is a little bit of an oxymoron. But there was a time when people could say they just don't make them like they used to, and they were right, for a while. So long, in fact, people forgot about the like they used to part, so they just assumed this is how it was. And me? Man, I'm just fucking happy my genre's back. I'm happy that horror movies can be top tier movies again. And I'm happy it don't look like they're going away anytime soon. Thank you, horror movies. We love you.
Now the gentle wind beckons through the leaves as autumn colors fall.